it's Noriko. Today we're gonna watch the entire history of Monster Hunter by RageGamingVideos. I watch that channel a lot because of Wilds, and I started watching their older Monster Hunter playthroughs. But I don't know a lot about Monster Hunter because Wilds is my first game and I only played a few 20 hours in Frontier. It's interesting to learn about gaming history, and Monster Hunter has become my new hyperfixation last year when I got introduced to Wilds. So yeah. And if you have any other videos you want me to react to, say in the comments. I read every single comment. And enjoy this react and enjoy watching me learn. So it's Monster Hunter time. Also, I watch a lot of Rage Gaming videos. They're my main source for Monster Hunter shit. So yeah. But I didn't watch this one yet. So this is gonna be full blind. Do you see Rage Gaming? Yes. It is silly, guys. So let's start watching.
The year is 2004. You sit down in front of your PlayStation 2, and presumably also a television if you want to actually see what's going on. You boot up the system and launch Monster Hunter. This was the beginning of a now legendary game series, entering its 6th generation with the recent release of Monster Hunter Wilds. Today I want to have a look back at the entire timeline of what brought us here, from the start of the series to the point that we're at now, either to get
Oh yeah, for those who don't know, I only played Wilds. I'm a 6th gen baby. So yeah, I don't know shit about Monster Hunter lore.
Give you more context if you are someone who has maybe only played the more modern games in the series, or maybe even first found the series through Monster Hunter Wilds itself, to let you know exactly where Monster Hunter has come from, what it has grown from, and how we've ended up where we are with Monster Hunter Wilds, the most ambitious title in the series to date. To start, we have to go back to the very first game, the one simply titled Monster Hunter. Fun fact, a lot of people assume it's Rathalos in the logo for this game, as he's like the flagship for the whole series, but it's not. It's actually Rathian in the logo, which you can tell because of the chin spike. This game was the first introduction of Monster Hunter to the world, in an initiative from Capcom to make games with a heavy focus on multiplayer and the more social aspect of gaming. There is a lot of concept art, mostly from the Hunter Encyclopedia 1, that shows the roots of where Monster Hunter originally started from this tortoise with an entire fortress on its back, to this version of Velocidrome that looks like a precursor to Tigrex, almost in an extremely terrifying way. There was also this monster that looked like a cross between a rhino and a tree, and generally speaking, the first idea of the game was a lot higher fantasy than what we eventually had released, meaning much more suspension of disbelief, literal magic as a concept as well in the world, but at some point they decided to try and switch to a bit of a more grounded approach, and that created the sort of mantra of Monster Hunter, which is to root everything in at least somewhat believable ecological.
I didn't pay much attention to Rathian's face, okay? I should pay attention to her tail because that one is dangerous.
Concepts. Sure, it wouldn't be 100% accurate, or else every monster would just be like a goat or a frog, and that would be it. But they made things make enough sense that everything started to feel a lot more real, rather than just a fantasy adventure. In Monster Hunter 1, the gameplay was as janky as it has ever been. You controlled your attacks with the right stick on the controller instead of the face buttons. The movement had a lot of stickiness to it. It was difficult to get to terms with. The monster health pools were very large, and
Wait. You attacked with the stick? What? Huh? That's stupid. What? I gotta play the first Monster Hunter at some point. Like, what? That sounds stupid.
The AI of the monsters was definitely...
I have lots of different Rathians. Until you play Monster Hunter World. That's on my list. I do own Worldborn on PS4, so we get into that at some point. I played like 7 hours of it until the first, like, I forgot, what is the Magma Elder Dragon called again? The first of his hunts. The one that you don't succeed in because Gigante is being a bitch. That hunt I did, and then I stopped playing because I want to stream it at some point. My first proper playthrough of World. Hello, Jelly Roy, how you guys doing?
Irritating. It was normal to have a cephadrome just swim around through the sand, just going around you over and over.
Yes, that one. I really gotta learn the monster names of the monsters that aren't in Wilds. But again, I only ever played Wilds so far. And a tiny bit of Rising World. And I hunted one Tigrex in Generations Ultimate. Because I was testing out the game to see if it's something I would want to stream. And I went online and just joined the party that was there of some Chinese players. And I ended up, my first hunt in Generations Ultimate was a fucking Tigrex. I actually have a clip on that saved on my Switch of my reaction to it. Like, bro, Tigrex fucking jump scared me.
Evading attacks unless you specifically brought sonic bombs to force them out, a direct counter. Same thing with Rathalos just hanging out in the sky, flying around out of your range for 90% of a hunt, unless you brought flash bombs and flashed them down.
Dude, I never used bombs in Wilds.
This can be looked at as super punishing, but back in the day, this was just what Monster Hunter was. It was how it worked. It rewarded preparation heavily, very heavily.
I never use bombs or pods or anything. I just go... If a monster is flying, I just jump up with it with my glaive. I'm a glaive main, by the way.
It would make it unbelievably easier than if you didn't have that. The game was punishing, but that made it even more satisfying when you were successful. It's also worth noting that in the first game, there were actually only 7 of the 14 weapon types that we know and love today.
Wait, what? Which ones are missing then? I'm guessing they don't have the glaive because it's too complicated for the first game.
Greatsword, sword and shield,
yeah.
dual blades, hammer, lance, and both of the
not even switch axe, okay.
That have been around since the very beginning. And even then, dual blades were actually sort of hidden as you had to upgrade into them from a sword and shield instead of being their own
interesting.
Base weapon from the start. For those who want a taste of what the first generation monster designs were like, and to point it out with monsters that we've had in the 5th generation return especially, Diablos, Basarios, Fatalis, Kezhu, Kirin, Rathalos, and Rathian were all monsters that first appeared in the first Monster Hunter game.
Wait, Kirin is in the first game? I thought Kirin came later. Like, I have gone through the wiki and looked at different monsters or whatever. That's interesting.
That all modern players would recognize and be familiar with. Generally speaking, I would describe these as very classic, iconic Monster Hunter creatures compared to things like the Pteranodon in Monster Hunter Rise, or
if this was in the first game. Yeah, I'm just guessing he's a file monster. Like he is in Iceborne, probably.
or Namiel in Iceborne, and they are all relatively tame creatures conceptually compared to those. But that's because Monster Hunter 1 established the sort of baseline expectation.
This was the first ever dragon. That is interesting. Because I never seen screenshots or footage of a Gen 1 Kirin, only from World. That is interesting.
Monsters being plausible beings within this universe, and then they just sort of push the boundaries further and further with every new game added to the series afterwards. As well, it's worth noting that this early on, story wasn't too much of a consideration for the game. There was quest text,
makes
and there
sense.
was a bit of a story to follow, but it was far from the top priority of the developers, and it stayed this way until around the 4th generation games. At the beginning of 2005, Monster Hunter G was released in Japan, which was the G rank expansion for the original game. For players only used to modern Monster Hunter, this is the Iceborne or Sunbreak equivalent, and G rank is what it was called before Master rank was a term coined in the 5th generation. A pile of extra monsters were added in, and a bunch of extra content as well, but it was all built upon the base game itself that already existed. This was the start of subspecies and rare species as a concept as well, and while there were 13 new monsters in Monster Hunter G, every one of them was a subspecies or rare species of one of the pre-existing monsters. And this started a pretty consistent trend of the expansions to base games having a lot of their monsters in them be variations, more so than purely fully new monsters. That said, this batch of subspecies was really cool as a concept for a game focused around believable monsters and for its time. But by today's standards, comparing to a lot of the more modern subspecies, a lot of the early ones were very simple and basic. Things like a color swap and then maybe one or two new moves, some minor behavior changes, as opposed to the modern guys which fully change like their elements and use their bodies totally differently. And this is why in Monster Hunter World you have the contrast of something like Pink Rathian being a Rathian that's pink and has some extra backflips, and then in Iceborne you get Coral 𝘴𝘃𝘴𝘃, a brand new subspecies who is extremely creative and completely different compared to normal 𝘴𝘃𝘴𝘃. In late 2005.
Oh yeah, I know some of the world monsters because I played the mobile game. I forgot the name. What's that now? I think I played a bit of that, so I know some of the world monsters.
In Japan, there was the release of Monster Hunter Portable, and in early 2006, this happened for the rest of the world as Monster Hunter Freedom on the PSP. These are essentially the same game, and it is a port of the entirety of both Monster Hunter and its G-Rank expansion to the PSP. But notably, while Monster Hunter G was exclusive to Japan, this brought all of that content to the rest of the world as well. On top of that, the game also added one new monster in 𝘕𝘪𝘯𝘵, who Iceborne players would recognize from the Guiding Lands. This was also the first game in the series to introduce a village farm mechanic where you could safely cultivate and grow and collect resources for free in the town without having to do dangerous stuff. And yeah, I know, that wasn't a thing originally, and that's sort of crazy. And this farming mechanic is what eventually evolved through each and every game that followed and has ended up being the trade and collection system with all of the villages in the Forbidden Lands that we now have through Nata in Wilds. Not too long after this, in February of 2006, Monster Hunter 2 released for the PlayStation 2 in Japan only, and it was also known as Monster Hunter DOS. This added in 4 new weapon types that we all know and love now, being Longsword, Gunlance, Hunting Horn, and Bow. And it's worth noting that a lot of
Still not one of my 2 weapons. I started Wilds with the Switch Axe, but then switched to Glaive later on, like 100 hours in. So yeah, and those weapons still don't exist in DOS. Bro, what?
Players even today still hold 2nd generation Longsword as being the best version of the weapon, the most enjoyable even in its simplicity. They also updated the original weapons too. They added in a proper day and night system for quests, and there were even seasons in it too, which all had an effect on what quest you could take and what.
I started out this Monster Hunter try. If there's some kind of veterans at that point, we talk about fair. But you're definitely veterans. I think if you played anything before World, you were absolutely a veteran.
Monsters would spawn. This was part of Monster Hunter starting to have a world that felt somewhat alive, rather than just a collection of levels to progress through or a collection of monsters to beat, making the monsters feel a little bit more tied to the environments that they actually live in, making it feel more believable that they do. This was also when the devs started to branch out a lot more with the monster designs as well, like purposefully pushing themselves to think out of the box with the additions of crab monsters, which are one of my.
Oh, dude. I hope we get crab monsters in the expansion for Wilds. They look so cool. They have to add crabs, please. They're one of the monster types I want to see it in Wilds. That and the bugs. Either one of those.
Favorite monster types in the series personally, as well as fanged beasts, with things like Kongolala being a fantastic example of a really just crazy, silly monster. A big pink monkey who deflects attacks with his stomach, farts or burps to stop you from using items, and then eats mushrooms to gain status effects to use against you. And he is also one of my favorite returning creatures in Monster Hunter Wilds, to the point where he literally threw his poop at me, and I laughed instead of being upset about it. He is super silly, but he's also based in a lot of real-world concepts. Like, these are all personality bits that fit a real-world monkey, just sort of mashed together from multiple different.
Maybe in the woods or one lab area. Yeah, also, couldn't the expansion just add a new area to it? Like, Like they could add like a coast area or something. I don't know. Like didn't Iceborne add like the snow area? Or was it in base game? I'm not sure. I don't know. But they could just add another area to it. Probably.
Types of monkeys and exaggerated, of course, in some creative ways. This game also had Yamasukami, which is one of the most wild concepts of a monster they have
I've seen that one
ever
before.
come up with, and a monster that I really hope to see brought back to the series one day as well. And this was also the game that brought in decorations as a concept, putting sockets in your equipment so you could add skill ranks through the system.
Wait, decorations weren't a thing in the first game? Damn.
And skill ranks as a whole is a system I don't even really want to get into, but to try and crunch it down quickly, it was way more complex than it is today. In the old style games, you'd have to reach a certain number of points in a skill before it would activate to begin with, and if you had enough negative points in a skill, you would get a negative skill as well, which was just a detriment to your character. So you had to balance around these things somewhat carefully. If you hit 10 points in a skill, you would activate its base version. Some skills would have further ranks, you could activate it like 15 or 20 points in the skill respectively, and in modern terms, just think of 10 points as being one rank of a skill now. But you had to use multiple armor pieces to get to that number, and getting multiple skills made that even more tough to work out, especially because of the negative skills. Put simply, I'm really glad we moved away from this system, honestly. I think negative skills as a concept are pretty fun, and I wouldn't mind that being brought back in some way, but the way that skills work in modern games is generally a significant improvement from how it all began, and it's just much easier to understand. In 2007, we had the release of Monster Hunter Portable 2nd in Japan, which also came to the West as Monster Hunter Freedom 2, the PSP port of Monster Hunter DOS, with some even further new additions as well. The most notable of these being 3 new monsters: a 𝘕𝘴𝘦, the king of gladiatorial combat,
that looks
𝘕𝘪𝘯,
cool.
who actually was fully created just to have a big raptor version of what the community called 𝘕𝘲𝘶𝘴𝘦, later renamed to being called 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘕 and made their own thing. In the games prior to this, there was a chance for a 𝘕𝘲𝘶𝘴𝘦 to just spawn as like white, just completely incorrectly colored, and so they just sort of ran with it, made it a thing, and stuck in 𝘕𝘪𝘯 to be their leader. Then they also added in Tigrex, who was the flagship of this game, as the arrival to the West of Monster Hunter 2nd Generation.
Yeah,
this was a very big deal for the fans on this side of the globe.
Oh,
But it's
Tigrex
worth
is so
noting that
cool.
because of these releases, the West never had a home console version of this game, which is quite interesting in itself, and it's also worth noting that at this point, the series was quite niche in the West. In 2007 for Japan and Korea, but in 2008 for the rest of the world, Capcom released Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, also known as Monster Hunter Portable 2nd G. This is the G-rank game of the 2nd generation, the expansion title. In the lead up to this game releasing, another Monster Hunter game was being developed simultaneously, not one for the main series, sort of a spin-off. It was Monster Hunter Frontier, a major
the MMO?
Monster Hunter game
Yeah,
that
okay.
ran for over a decade. And honestly, if I were to dive into the entirety of Frontier, I'd be here for twice as long as I would.
Did anyone watching play Frontier? Was it fun? I'm just guessing it's not in service anymore. But yeah, missed out on what's on it for you. You didn't take it. I mean, they're probably also in Generations Ultimate now.
With just the rest of the series, the game was massive, it had an insane amount of monsters, and it's absolutely worth checking it out if you can. But for the sake of conversation about the main series, the important things to note, at least for now, are that both 𝘕𝘴𝘦, who hasn't been around for ages, and 𝘕𝘴𝘲, who was in Monster Hunter World, are monsters that were developed simultaneously by
This
the
stuff looks
main Monster Hunter
awesome.
development team for Freedom Unite, and by the development team making Monster Hunter Frontier as well. They both influenced each other's versions of these monsters, and that said, Frontier ended up releasing first, and it released with its monsters first, so these were the first 2 monsters in the mainline series that had technically originated somewhere else first. In total, Freedom Unite had 10 monsters that weren't in Freedom 2. Those were 2
There are some private servers that might still be online today. Oh, interesting. Okay.
of them. Then we have another 5 subspecies or variations of monsters. We had the introduction of 𝘂𝘓𝘃, the counterpart to a 𝘕𝘴𝘃, and then there was also
Dude, the monster design in Monster Hunter is so fucking good. And when it comes to monster design, Monster Hunter is like top 3 of all time. Like, goddamn.
Vespoid Queen Quest, which technically does count. And then, of course, the flagship of the expansion, 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘵, an absolutely beloved creature by many.
I've seen this one in Monster Hunter Stories. I played a bit of the Stories games too. I know this one from there.
On the topic of cat-like monsters, this was also the game that added in palicos for the first time. Though, at this point in the series, they were called feline comrades. Specifically, palicos as a term had not yet been coined. This concluded the second generation games and pushed us forward to Monster Hunter Tri, releasing in Japan in 2009.
I actually played a bit of Tri at a demo in a bookstore. That was my first and only Monster Hunter experience until I got Wilds.
And 2010 for the rest of the world. This was where a swap happened to Nintendo consoles instead of Sony, mainly, with this release happening on the original Nintendo Wii. This was when things started to get really funky. The way that I like to think about it is that the first generation established a baseline of combat and world and monster design. Then the second generation expanded on that and played with it and made it a bit more unique. Then the third generation is when they really just started to smash the walls down around them and explore some major differences from what the series was before. The big difference in Tri was underwater combat. They expanded the game to not only have land combat.
Looks like the game. Yeah, it was a bookstore next to my school. Actually, I went there off to skip class, which is playing the Wii. That's also where I played Mario Galaxy 2 for the first time. They just had a gaming section.
As standard, but you can now traverse underwater in a three-dimensional space, swimming with the monstrous fish that inhabited it, and hunting even more aquatic large monsters. This game was the origination of crazy creatures like 𝘕𝘴𝘠, the spiky anglerfish who hides on the seabed.
The fuck is 𝘕𝘴𝘠? Why does he look like that?
𝘕𝘪𝘯𝘵, the big spongy boy that he is, who would transfer from water to land, and of course the flagship in 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘵 himself. But while the game added in
one of the best hunts in Wilds, I love him.
Either this was also the first game to introduce Devil Joe, the angry pickle on legs who definitely does not swim, thankfully.
I coded him a few times in a mobile game. He's a pain in the ass.
And he was part of a roster that included 15 brand new monsters to the series. And aside from this, there were some other very interesting changes for Tri as well. One being that bow, gun lance, hunting horn, and dual blades weren't in this game for whatever reason. They were just left out. But this was simultaneously the game that added in the switch axe as a new weapon for the first time, the first of the transforming weapons that would eventually be added, and arguably the flashiest weapon added to the series up to this point. As well as this was only limited to Tri itself, there was the concept of medium bowgun. Specifically, bowguns were extremely customizable, and part of this was that there was a weight mechanic, and what decided if a bowgun was a light or heavy bowgun was where it fell on that weight scale with the parts that you choose. But there was also a section in between light and heavy where you would technically have a new weapon type called medium bowgun. This is obviously quite a complex system, and as cool as it sounds, this was removed very quickly. This is the only version of Monster Hunter in which this has ever existed, and medium bowgun has just not been seen again since. As well, in Monster Hunter Tri, we had shakalaka companions instead of straight up felines like in the previous game, but they were a lot more conversational, so they actually were a part and personality of your hunts. In 2010, we had the release of Monster Hunter Portable 3rd in Japan only, and this was the port for Monster Hunter Tri to portable systems. This also specifically put it on the PSP. Unlike Tri, this game did not have underwater.
The PlayStation stores are still open, right? So I could technically still get these games on my Vita, right? Probably. Maybe I'll check that out later.
Combat at all, theoretically due to it being on portable systems and that being a hard thing to bring over. But what it did add was a ton more than the previous portable games did. First up, the missing weapons from Monster Hunter Tri were in Portable 3rd. There were also fully new monsters within Portable 3rd like Arzuros, and also the flagship of the game, 𝘕𝘂𝘠, who is a fan favorite of a lot of people, as well as my personal favorite monster of all time introduced in this game.
I know 𝘕𝘂𝘠 because of the Digimon collab, because I fused it with Garurumon.
𝘕𝘪𝘯𝘵, and he started here for the first time too. But there were also 9
he looks
subspecies
cool.
brand new for this game, including some much more creative stuff than we'd had before this point, like 𝘕𝘪𝘯𝘵, who I'm a pretty big fan of personally, and I think might be the specific marker where variations of monsters really started to branch out and get more interesting. In late 2011, Monster Hunter 3G released specifically in Japan for the Nintendo 3DS, and was later released in 2012 for...
I could probably still get my hands on the 3DS games, right? Probably. If not, I just... I do it for totally legal means on my modded, I mean not modded 3DS.
the Wii U, as well as Monster Hunter 3G HD version, before eventually being released on both platforms to the rest of the world under the singular name of Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate in early 2013. This had all of the new content.
Wait, wasn't 3 Ultimate also on the Wii U?
From Portable Third, but also brought back the underwater combat and underwater areas from base Monster Hunter Tri. All of the weapons were in here. We got a second Shakalaka hunting companion to bring along with us in Kayamba. As well, there were 10 new monsters that were not in Portable Third or in Tri, including 5 subspecies, 2
it was on Wii U, okay.
variant, and the new monsters being the flagship 𝘂𝘂𝘂𝘂𝑑𝑒𝑜𝑠, who also introduced the blast status to the series in its original form as slime, and essentially was a big part of statuses becoming a big deal in the series to begin with, and then 𝘕𝘪𝘯𝑚𝑜𝑟𝑎𝑙𝑒s, the final of the Black Dragons, which is the term used for the various Fataluses, Alatreon, and of course 𝘕𝘪𝘯𝑚𝑜𝑟𝑎𝑙𝑒s as well. This monster was essentially the walking volcano before Zorah Magdaros became a thing in 5th generation and basically took that title. For reference of 𝘕𝘪𝘯𝑚𝑜𝑟𝑎𝑙𝑒s power level though, his body...
But is this a fire elder dragon in the water? Oh, hell yeah.
His natural body heat is so insanely high temperature that the body of water you fight him in is red from the blood of the creatures that just straight up died because of how hot he made the water
shit.
while walking through it.
That's so cool.
Natural calamity. And this is one of those monsters I would love to see come back in the modern games, because as a concept, 𝘕𝘪𝘯𝑚𝑜𝑟𝑎𝑙𝑒s was absolutely terrifying, but his actual in-game fight was a bit more of a punching bag that struggled with being too big and too slow to fight properly as an actual monster, which I would love to do with him at some point. This ended the 3rd generation, and as we move on to the 4th generation, some things started to change a bit. The main quirk of this gen is that there are multiple games in it, but they are all for portable systems, as opposed to previous generations, where it was essentially one game, then it was ported to...
By the way, how does it feel to play Monster Hunter on a 3DS? I imagine it's kind of shit because 3DS is not good for action games in my opinion. How did it feel to play Monster Hunter on a 3DS? Or just honestly any handheld system? Because I cannot imagine that feeling good after a longer session.
Portable systems, and then there was an expansion tying it all together. Instead, 4th gen was our first one, with 2 fully separated main series games, each getting their own expansion. This generation started with Monster Hunter 4 in 2013 for the Nintendo 3DS. This is generally considered the first properly in-depth story in a Monster Hunter.
It was fun back in the day, yeah, because it was nothing better.
Game. Sure, there was like quest text and stuff in prior ones, the occasional cutscene, but mostly it was just unconfirmable lore talking about how there may or may not have been an ancient civilization or something, and it all felt a little bit more like justification for things like Bowgun existing in the eventual edition of stuff like Switch Axe and Charge Blade, more than like an actual story they were trying to present and lore that they knew existed in the world. Whereas Monster Hunter 4 brought in a very consistent, purposeful story that shaped your entire journey through the game, to the point of friends.
Oh yeah, wasn't 4 the one with the Fire Emblem collab? Was that the one? Or was it 4 Ultimate?
Frenzied monsters becoming a common part of the game, and in the expansion, Apex monsters being the basis of the entire endgame system. And this is where Fabius, the ace lancer, the commander of the expedition in Monster Hunter Wilds, originates from. He is from this game and he is in this story, hence his deep connection to 𝘕𝘪𝘯𝘕 and the frenzy in Wilds. On top of this, this game was the introduction of our final 2 weapons to the main series, being Charge Blade and Insect Glaive.
Insect Glaive! Let's go! Oh, big claiming!
Both of these were a very sort of shallow version of what they eventually
Oh.
became in the games that have come out since. But they
Okay.
were also both very fun in this first version nonetheless, as someone who has tried both. As well, it's worth mentioning that underwater combat did not return in the 4th generation, and to this day, underwater combat is locked to the 3rd gen. It has
Yeah, if only the characters came back in Wilds, right guys?
not come back. But the equivalent sort of unique extra take that they wanted to work around in Monster Hunter 4 was verticality in the zones on land, adding ledges that you could do jump attacks off of, as well as the addition of the first version of the mounting feature, where if
There's a god is an old hunter. Ben knows how to do always. Yeah.
you stacked up enough aerial damage, you would get on top of the monster and basically grapple with it, and then either hold on to protect yourself when the monster was thrashing, or stab it with a little knife when it was safe, in order to end it with a free knockdown. This was also a core part of Insect Glaive as one of the new weapons, as well it didn't have its full bouncy aerial moveset that it has now. It was the only weapon with an on-demand aerial attack that didn't require a ledge to essentially just force loads more mounts per hunt than any other weapon could achieve. Overall, this mounting mechanic, along with the idea of more verticality in zones, ended up becoming a staple in the series moving forwards for all future games, though generally there have been some pretty varied takes on it over the years too, like wyvern riding in Rise and Sunbreak, which is a completely just out of left field change to mounting, but of course we've gone back to a more standard mount for Wilds. Monster Hunter 4 also had probably the most creative new monster additions since the 2nd generation games when crabs and monkeys became a thing, with the base game of Monster Hunter 4 having an absolutely incredible rare species in Molten Tigrex, as well as a couple of other monster variations too. But then 11 fully fresh, brand new monsters that included some truly quirky and wacky personalities. Zamtrios, who I still think is my second favorite monster even after Wilds, was from this game. Celtis, and of course Celtis Queen, who was also near the top for me. Najarala, who is a crazy goddamn snake monster, of which they have not made many. Even 𝘰𝘂𝘴𝘕. They just went all in on creating new monster types and skeletons and breaking the barrier of what people thought monsters could be like in this series all over again. An interesting bonus note that I'm maybe putting together too far here is that the 2nd generation had a bump of new skeletons and monster types that were super out of left field. The 4th generation had another big bump of those same types of really strange new monster concepts, and we just recently had the 6th generation, which has followed this pattern to add in cephalopods with a complete rework of the Leviathan movement patterns as well. We've got things like 𝘰𝘴𝘴𝘕, which, while still a flying wyvern technically, has these full extra chain appendages he swings around, or 𝘂𝑚𝑐𝑑una, who, while technically a Leviathan, moves and acts in a totally unique way. I know this is a history video, but patterns like that do make me a little bit extra excited when I notice them, and they help me get sort of expectations for future games. As to me, it presents a pattern here where the even-numbered generations in Monster Hunter are more about breaking the mold with the monsters, and the odd-numbered generations are more about pushing the gameplay and the environments. That said, this was also the game that added 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘵 as its flagship, as well as 𝘔𝘰𝘔𝘰𝘠, of course, was in there too, and of course, a lot of people consider those their favorite monsters as well. On top of that, they brought back the feline comrades instead of 𝘂𝘂 and 𝘰𝘠𝘴 from the 3rd gen, but now they were called palicos, and they had a little bit of meowing here and there. They had some actual text that you could read, but you can thank 𝘂𝘂 and 𝘰𝘠𝘴 for our hunting pals having proper personality, which of course had eventually led on to full-on conversational English-speaking palicos in Monster Hunter Wilds. Moving on to 2014, still over 10 years ago, the G-Rank expansion for this game released in Japan called Monster Hunter 4G. This was released later in 2015 for the rest of the world under the name of Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate.
That's the one you guys keep talking about.
It's worth noting that this means the entire base game of Monster Hunter 4 was actually never available in the West, so that should be a sign of how niche the series still was over here, even as recently as 10 years ago. That said, this expansion added quite a lot as well, with the Everwoods were a concept in the base game, which was a map with essentially just changing biomes all linked together zone by zone for crazy monster variety potential, which of course became a very direct inspiration for the Guiding Lands endgame in Iceborne. But what Monster Hunter 4U specifically added in here was expeditions. These allowed you to visit the Everwood without any information of which zones you'd be going to or which monsters would spawn there, and while this was a relatively simplistic version, the concept of expeditions would become a very standard addition to the series in the future. As well, this added the idea of Apex monsters, which were uber powerful monster variations unique to this game, mostly built for additional endgame difficulty and reward for players who were able to overcome them. And this was essentially the first proper endgame mechanic in the series that wasn't just hunting for the sake of build creation and random decoration drops, and the precursor to what has essentially been a system within every game since then. As well, this game did of course have a pile of new monsters, and this included 10 variations of monsters from the base game, including 2 full-on variants, as well as Sergios, who is an extremely well-made—
Dude, Sergio, I love Sergio in Wild so much. It's absolute peak, one of my favorite monsters. Design-wise, not to hunt. I fucking hate to hunt Sergios.
and creative fan-favorite flagship, and then also of course 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘵, who is essentially the final boss of the game, where a lot of the story and expansion builds towards protecting—
I love Gog! Because I got to experience him in Wilds. Hell yeah. Dude, Gog is so much fun. And once recency bias wears off, it's probably still gonna be my favorite hunt.
the city from his eventual ascent.
You should see, he has an Apex form. Can you post it on Discord real quick in the Monster Hunter chat, please? I need to see it. I need to absolutely see that.
Overall, where the 3rd generation had a heavy focus on its unique mechanic that hasn't since returned in underwater combat, 4th generation, at least 4 and 4 Ultimate, had a heavy focus on adding to the base of what the series already was, building the foundation up to give more for future games to work with. That said, there was another game in the 4th generation of Monster Hunter, and here's where the release order is starting to get a little bit odd. In 2015 for Japan, 2016 for the rest of the world, we had Monster Hunter Generations Release, also known as Monster Hunter X or Monster Hunter Cross in Japan. This is the closest thing to a spin-off game that is still technically a main series Monster Hunter game.
Wait, Generations is a spin-off? Why?
The main goal of this game was to put as many returning monsters in as possible, to try and essentially update some monsters that hadn't been around since the first game, up to the 4th generation gameplay mechanics and standards. As someone who had their first experience with a large amount of monsters in the series within Generations Ultimate, the expansion, they did a fantastic job with that, as far as I'm concerned. They made it way more accessible to see a lot of monsters that you otherwise would have had to play through much earlier games to see. This
I expect the best quality since for yourself. Yeah, no worries.
This game was essentially all about celebrating Monster Hunter's past, but that didn't stop it from innovating to a relatively crazy degree too, and doing some really strange things. This game added hunting styles as well as hunter arts. There were 4 hunting styles to begin with. Guild, which was essentially standard. Striker, which generally had a reduced moveset compared to normal weapons, but could use more hunter arts than the other styles. Aerial style, which essentially gave every weapon an aerial combo option similar to Insect Glaive, so you didn't need ledges to go into the air. And then Adept style, which was based around iframe evading attacks, and then being able to combo that, if successful, into special moves. This was then paired with Hunter Arts, which were essentially gauges that you could fill up by dealing damage to the monster, and then when full you could use them for a special effect, sort of like a limit break. Some of these were just like a super high iframe evade that restores sharpness to your weapon. Others are like a parry or counter attack on a weapon that wouldn't normally have access to those, and some are just really high damage attacks that you can bust out on a downed monster. Overall, this added a ridiculous amount of variety to hunting, but it also made it feel very sort of arcade-like. I don't mean that term in a negative way, but it felt very notably different from every prior Monster Hunter game, and while this game was definitely the furthest it has pushed in that direction, different aspects of the hunting styles and hunter arts, specific attacks or animations, have been brought back time and time again to be reintroduced as part of weapon movesets in games that released after this point. As for the new monsters this time around, we had quite a lot of pretty unique new creatures, including 4 full flagships sharing the title for this game: Astalos, Gammoth, Glavenus, and Mizitsune. There were also 12 Deviants, which was a new alternate monster type exclusive to Generations and its expansion, the first sort of new iteration on what Apex monsters were in 4 Ultimate. These were meant to give us super over-the-top versions of monsters that we already knew and loved, and quite a lot of them are remembered very fondly. Outside of those, there was also some extremely adventurous new additions like Malfestio, who is a totally unique monster within the series. He's not really like anything else, especially with this confusion status debuff that literally makes your controls go backwards. And then of course, Nakarkos, who had a really fun first that only showed as sort of tentacle guys acting as if they were its head, and it had multiple before of course the full reveal in high rank.
That looks
sick.
A
really fun sort of story beat in a game that was definitely not so much made with the story as a main component. Oh, and of course, it can't go without mentioning, this game also added in Prowler mode as a way to play the game, which for all intents and purposes, just let you play as a Palico. They have their own moveset, their own unique way of judging health and healing based around acorns, and you can customize them to focus on various playstyles within it too. Essentially, this was just a 15th weapon type for the series in the form of playing as your cat. And this has not yet returned in future Monster Hunter games, as sad as that is.
That is hilarious. That needs to come back.
In 2017, the expansion for this game released in Japan under the name of XX or Double Cross, but didn't come out for the rest of the world until August of 2018 as Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. For reference, Monster Hunter World had a
finally a game I own
in January of 2018. So for Japan, Double Cross came out before World, but for the rest of us, it actually released after World. As well, while there was a version of this game for the 3DS, this expansion mainly released as a standalone title on the Nintendo Switch. That said, it's worth noting, as a result of this timing, I'm about to talk about these things as if they were added before World released, but for a lot of us, at least in the West, myself included, these things weren't experienced until after Monster Hunter World. So with that in mind, this expansion added 2 more hunting styles to each weapon to build onto the base game mechanics. These were Valor style, which made your sheath longer, but also able to absorb damage from incoming attacks, or instead launch off special attacks from the sheathing stance. As a cost, this style got less hunter arts able to be used than the others. Then there was also alchemy style, and this one was pretty crazy, mostly based around the alchemy barrel. As you fight, an alchemy meter will fill, and then you can use the barrel to create different items using this meter charge, including things like healing or buffs, earplugs, or you could even generate like a cannon shot from the barrel, which is pretty neat too, honestly. As well, they even added more hunter art compared to the base game too, and on top of this, the game added in a bunch of new monsters. 6 new deviants to add to the sort of endgame loop from the base game, including Bloodbath Diablos as a sort of unofficial poster boy of the deviants among them. But then there was also the additions of both Valstrax, who is an absolute fan favorite monster, basically a jet in monster form with incredibly unique
I've seen a friend hunt that one.
And then of course 𝘂𝘓, the final boss of this game,
so cool.
the beautiful golden mantis who uses her incredibly strong webbing to throw pieces of metal around at you as a weapon, or build an entirely, essentially, mech out of scrap metal.
What?
This creativity in this game with the monster designs was crazy.
What do you mean builds a mech? You can't just say that and not show it. What? Huh?
And as such, it's easy to see why a lot of this stuff hasn't returned since, but it also makes
he just doesn't show it well. Fuck
such
you.
a trove of unique Monster Hunter experiences,
bro.
Especially for someone who has never played a game prior to the 5th generation. On which note, let's move on to the start of the modern era. In January of 2018, Monster Hunter World released simultaneously worldwide for the first time in series history. This game aimed to completely reinvent the
Gimmick some of Battle Machine Definitive. What? That's so cool.
Wheel, essentially, when it came to Monster Hunter. Of course, a lot of the same design philosophies were at play, but the graphic style changed immensely, and the biggest goal of this new game was to try and play up the immersion factor as much as physically possible, to ground the game in an almost realistic feeling, and to make the game world feel alive. One of the biggest features of this transition was, well, a removal of transitions between zones specifically. In Monster Hunter World, for the first time, we had full entire maps that you could walk through on foot without a single loading screen between any of the areas. They added in endemic life that you could even capture with a net, and then...
Wait, endemic life didn't exist until World? Damn. I thought it was a thing they would have put in earlier because they always had to focus on making everything seem grounded.
display in your bedroom,
Aw.
and the maps were larger, more open areas connected by pathways. And for the first time ever, there was a sort of realistic verticality to it all too. Of course, Monster Hunter 4 introduced a little bit of verticality with things like ledges that you could jump off of, even in the middle of a zone where you'd fight the monsters, but for the most part,
Okay,
even
cool.
those zones were just big, flat, open circles with a ledge on one side of it that was
Yeah, this looks like the Monster Hunter I know.
but Monster Hunter World had full-on like steep slopes that you could actually slide down, and added sliding attacks for each of the weapons. A lot of the verticality felt more natural. There were vines that you could swing off of, and you could attack from these too. There were environmental traps that were baked into the map for you to trigger yourself. And probably most importantly, the monsters would actively interact with each other for the first time properly. Great Jagras would eat Aptonoth while you were hunting it. Turf Wars were brought into the game as a way for large monsters to have actual sort of power scaling.
Yeah, that's the Monster Hunter I know, yeah.
And while hunting styles and
With
hunter
all that
didn't stick
stuff.
from generations over to Monster Hunter World, they did increase the movesets of all of the existing weapons, expanding them to try and make them all feel slightly flashier like Generations, but still approachable and still at least somewhat realistic. This, along with some really solid entries as far as the new monsters, made Monster Hunter World the most popular game in the entire series, with an especially large explosion of new players coming in from the West, where again, even just one generation prior, Monster Hunter was very niche outside of Japan, and so this game release was a real major turning point for the series. You'll notice from this point forward, an attempt to release the games more and more on PC, and more at the same time as the rest of the consoles, because PC gaming is a lot more popular in the West, and also the fact that every game since this time has released simultaneously worldwide, and of course just the notable marketing being done for the series now in the West too. For veteran players, outside of the novelty of all this, there were some down points with Monster Hunter World. While it expanded on the famed Wyvern monster category, which previously only had 𝘕𝘂oggr in it, it focused on this category maybe a bit too much. There were no fanged beasts, there were no carapaceans, no amphibians, snakes, insects, any of the funkier large monster types were just absent from this game. They stuck mostly to only a few basic skeletons and making as many monsters as they could around those skeletons. In hindsight, this is quite clearly the early limitations of a new engine, and this is because of all the other things that they did in Monster Hunter World to innovate the game. But even with that considered, the roster of monsters in base world is still full of beloved creatures. 19 new monsters if we include title updates, but
Damn.
things like Behemoth and Leshen that aren't really Monster Hunter creatures. Among those, quite a few fan favorites were added here too as well, such as the flagship 𝘕𝘂𝘕𝘠 or 𝘕𝘪𝘠𝘰, who everyone has the theme music of baked into their brain.
I had 𝘕𝘪𝘠𝘰s appear a few times in a mobile game. It's a pain.
This was also
That's
the game
all
that
I know.
introduced the slinger to the series as a concept, a way to offer a few different variations of ranged options to every hunter, some with special effects, and this was actually brought back and reiterated in Monster Hunter Wilds. As well, very importantly, two major features from the older games were changed up quite a bit for World. Tracking monsters was no longer done using knowledge and paintballs and searching manually. It was now done by collecting their footprints or droppings and then having scout flies pick up the scent and lead you to them. Some players weren't a big fan of this change, but I view it as both a quality of life improvement and a massive gain in immersion as well. And frankly, I'm sort of sad that this wasn't brought back in Wilds. I don't think it needed to be in Wilds, but I did really like this feature of World. Another really big change was that you can move while drinking potions. The movement is of course slowed down walking, it's not regular movement speed, but compared to all previous games in the series where you had to stop on the spot until the animation was finished, being able to move while healing is a massive change. And then to go along with that, there were now tents on the open world maps that had your full item box inside of them. In the old games, you had the resources you could fit in your pouch, and then anything you picked up on the map or supply items, nothing more than that. But World started a new system allowing you to restock items whenever you want, as long as you can get to a tent. This singular change has had one of the largest impacts on monster design over the years. And whether you think it is good or bad, it has undeniably pushed the challenge and difficulty of monsters towards attacks that can kill you in one hit, or combos that are so fast that you don't get the opportunity to heal, as opposed to in a lot of the older games, a lot of the challenge was from monsters just slowly peeling back your stock of healing until you eventually run out before you empty their health bar. This game also added full freedom for expeditions, meaning that you could just go to any map for any reason, random monsters would spawn, and you could hunt them if you wanted, you could gather items, it was fully up to you, it was your choice.
Wait, so before World it was all just quest-based? Damn, that's boring. Damn.
And the endgame brought in investigations. These were semi-randomized hunts for a specific target monster with things like variable maps, time limits, reward quality, number of feints, all of that stuff. And this system is something that has returned again since multiple times. The game's endgame monster variation was tempered monsters. This gave the monster a sort of shiny metallic sheen across their whole body, increased the damage that they deal, and generally also increased the rewards that they gave, and in some cases increased their health. This system was not in Rise and Sunbreak, but has returned once more in Monster Hunter Wilds. There were also arch-tempered versions of each Elder Dragon added with their own unique armor sets as rewards, and some of them even getting extra moves added in for those versions too. This was also the first game with title updates as a main feature, which were additional monsters and quests added past the initial release of the game on a pretty regular schedule, essentially giving us months and months of more Monster Hunter after the release of the game, which definitely made a lot of people quite happy as well, but some people were upset that that stuff wasn't in the game to begin with. It's a whole thing. This
that was always happening.
On the story.
People are never happy, whatever happened. Any change, people are upset.
From base Monster Hunter World, which was by far the most effort put into a Monster Hunter story so far, with tons of fully voiced cutscenes and interactions between the characters.
Yo, this must look
sick. This was the first game to use the modern versions of equipment skills, switching away from the more convoluted method of the past. The next year, in 2019, we had the release of the Iceborne expansion worldwide for Xbox and PlayStation, with the PC release coming 6 months later. The main feature that this expansion added across the whole game was the Clutch Claw. This was a sort of extra variation on the slinger. It allowed you to grip and pull yourself onto monsters and grapple them, and use this position for one of two main things. You could either tenderize the monster part you were attached to, which was an attack that then made that part take more damage for a period of time afterwards. Also interacting with things like the weakness exploit skill, and the other option was to shoot slinger ammo point blank to try and throw the monster's head into a wall and get a free knockdown, as well as a big pile of extra damage. Doing this did percent health damage, and doing it once or twice would always enrage a monster. This did funky things like making Agitator, the skill that gives you affinity and attack when a monster is enraged, way more popular because monsters were always enraged. Because of how strong both of these things were, they become extremely important to keep up with and do as often as you can, which made them an inignorable part of the gameplay loop in the entire expansion. On top of this, all of the weapons got new attacks once again, some of which playing around the Clutch Claw itself, like Hammer being able to spin combo out of its charge attacks into a Clutch Claw, but generally speaking the new attacks were very much enjoyed by the players. This, for the first time, added in Master Rank difficulty as a replacement for G Rank, but it was essentially the same idea, a higher difficulty level for the expansion itself, and there were also 17 new monsters in this expansion, if we also include the title updates. 11 of them were subspecies, rare species, or variants. Then there was 𝘔𝘂𝘦 as the proper flagship of the expansion. But then also there were monsters like Namielle, who is one of the craziest and awesomest designs in the series.
Holy shit, this design is amazing. What?
This game continued the tempered monsters from the base game, but then also expanded into the Guiding Lands as an endgame mechanic too. A new map with multiple different biomes attached to each other, with randomized monster spawns all connected.
Oh, there's the return of the random mechanic. Okay, cool.
It sounds a bit like the Everwood from the 4th generation.
Yeah.
I described it that way on purpose, because the Guiding Lands is essentially an evolution of the Everwoods. This was a really cool concept, a way to have nearly every monster in the game able to interact with each other if they spawned at the right time, by having these mixed biomes on the same map. It added a ton of fun replayability to the endgame that was extremely unique to Iceborne itself too, and while it was pretty janky at first launch, the devs released patch after patch, changing the way the Guiding Lands worked to make it better and better for the player. And a little remembered fact is that Iceborne had a mechanic where you could mount small monsters and have them bring you to things or places of interest, which clearly was the original inspiration for Palamutes in Rise and Sunbreak, and eventually for the Sacred in Wild Wilds as well. This trend of title updates continued for this expansion as well, and it of course culminated in the fantastic rework of Fatalis, a monster all the way from the very first game of the series, but remade with so much passion and effort and detail that he felt like he may as well be a new creature as a result, and some players are still trying to beat him for the first time, which is really impressive. In 2021, we then had our most...
Dude, when I stream World at some point, I'm gonna have to do a Fatalis. Oh god, I've seen gameplay of World Fatalis, and I'm not looking forward to that. Like, oh my god, that fight looks crazy.
Recent full game of the series released before Wilds, which was Monster Hunter Rise. This is the portable game of the 5th generation, the Monster Hunter Generations equivalent, and it had a bunch of new experimental features that completely changed the way that this game felt compared to Monster Hunter World. There was, of course, the Palamute, a second hunting pal to go along with the Palico, except this one was a dog that you could ride around on as a mount. To go along with this, every map in Rise was made with the idea that if you could see it, you could go there, which I think was a really cool part of this game. You could run just straight up walls that were flat walls if you had the amount of stamina required to reach the top. You could climb to the top of any cliff that you could see. It was essentially an exaggeration, a caricature of the map freedom that we were introduced
Would have been another Black Dragon first before you can challenge the Vital, bro.
to in Monster Hunter World. This combined with maps themselves being designed around that concept and the rework of how endemic life worked, where instead of things like Blastodes just existing on the ground where you find them, you could now pick them up, carry them with you, and then just throw them at a monster. That was sort of crazy. Then there was also the Spirit Bird mechanic with all the floating, glowing birds along common pathways in the map, each one giving you some stat upgrades when you go through them that only last for the rest of the quest. That combined with the weapon mechanics we'll get into in a moment just made the game feel extremely arcade-like, and I don't mean that in a bad way at all. The pace was super quick, immersion was a secondary thought this time around, but quality of life was extremely high in this version of Monster Hunter, and it was clearly designed with fun, fast fun, as a singular main goal. As for weapon changes, we had the introduction of switch skills, which was essentially fully revamped hunting styles from Generations and...
Wait, didn't Rise have a troubled development because of the pandemic? Wasn't that a thing that they had to finish up the story with title updates? I mean, it was Rise, right? I heard about that.
Generations Ultimate, where instead of picking from preset movesets, you instead could change individual parts of your moveset, customizing it to be whatever felt right to you and whatever you liked most in that moment. This fit alongside the wire bug system, which was also like a revamped version of Hunter Arts, where instead of the gauge building up while you hunt, it is instead a set number of wire bugs you have as a resource, and when you spend them, they regenerate on a timer. You could use these for traversal, you could use them as part of attacks. They had a fair bit of variety to them in the way they worked, and they left a lot of choices to the player on how to use them. Outside of that, probably the most unique feature was the replacement for mounting. In Monster Hunter World, we got was essentially a more expanded and immersive version of the same mounting concept from 4th generation, but in Monster Hunter Rise, this was replaced completely with wyvern riding, where you essentially use wire bugs to control monsters. You mount them and ride them around, controlling their actions, making them do attacks against other monsters. And this led to people literally using monsters as weapons. Rather than mounting your intended target,
that is so cool.
Mount a different monster and then go attack the target with them. On top of this, the base game added in the rampage mechanic, which was essentially tower defense against waves of large monsters, which is a really cool concept that it didn't feel quite right in execution, but I can see where they were coming from. And this is likely why it was left out of the expansion game, because it wasn't received too well. That said, along with the rampage system, there were Apex monsters, but not like the Apex monsters from 4th generation. These were a new monster variation, exclusive to Rise and Sunbreak, but for the most part, they were completely inspired by deviants from Generations and Generations Ultimate, and were basically just an excuse to bring back those same concepts. A lot of the Apex monsters just had moves just completely directly lifted from them, if not their entire moveset. That said, in total, Rise had 19 new monsters to add to the series, 6 of them were apexes, 1 of them is essentially a variation of Valstrax, 1 is a second variation of the final boss which was added in within title updates, and the others are all extremely creative, fantastic Monster Hunter monsters, 2 of which are some of my all-time favorite creatures. 𝘕𝘂𝘕𝘠𝘵, the mother spider who uses your babies as wire bugs essentially, and then 𝘕𝘂𝘓𝘓, the big brutal serial
These are
killer
such
polar
cool
bear
designs.
who forms great swords on his arms made of ice and then also scratches his back against walls because he's a bear. This game initially launched without the proper ending to its main story, which came through title updates, but the title updates each had quite a few monsters in them, and also came out extremely quickly after the initial release of the base game. A lot of people attribute the initial unfinished story to the time of the game's development, as with the game being released in 2021, that means a lot of the sort of later touches would have needed to be done in 2020, a year I dare not specify what was going on in the world with for fear of the YouTube algorithm smiting me down. In January of 2022, the game released for PC, and then moving on to June of 2022, we had the release of the Sunbreak expansion, the Master Rank additions for Monster Hunter Rise. This was notable for being the first Monster Hunter title to release simultaneously for PC as the main console options, showing the significantly growing interest in Monster Hunter on PC. Specifically, which especially makes sense given that Sunbreak was otherwise a Switch exclusive at the time, or at least it was until April of 2023 when the game did release for PlayStation and Xbox as well. The Sunbreak expansion.
Yeah, I have the game on both Switch and PS5. So when I stream it eventually, I hope I need to decide which version I play, so everyone can join because it doesn't have crossplay, I think. So yeah.
Expansion was like a mini love letter to the West. Our main hub had a very sort of medieval, European, or even specifically British feel to it, and instead of the new monsters being related to yokai, like they all were in base Rise, the new ones in Sunbreak were all supposed to represent classic Western horror monsters. Things like the Three Lords, the main trio of the game, who were 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘵, inspired by Frankenstein, of course, 𝘠𝘴𝑔𝑒𝑟𝑜n, also inspired, of course, by the werewolf as a concept as he swaps stance from 4-legged to 2-legged in combat, and then of course 𝘕𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑧𝑚, who is deeply tied to the 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝑵, which are like bats fused with leeches, so blood-sucking bats, and 𝘕𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑧𝑚 himself wraps his wings around himself like the classic concept of a vampire hiding behind their cloak.
That looks so
Otherwise,
sick.
the monster roster was once again mostly dedicated to monster variations, as is relatively standard for an expansion. The endgame system was all based around the 𝘔𝘰𝘯s and afflicted monsters, which was sort of similar to Frenzy in function, making the monsters act erratically, but adding a mechanic where certain body parts would have the 𝘔𝘰𝘯s on them, and if you beat up those parts when this happened, you'd get extra pops of damage, which sounds a little bit like wounds in Monster Hunter Wilds, so they definitely tried to make this a bit more interesting along the way too. This system then was tied long-term to the Anomaly Investigations, which in some ways was a return of the investigation system from Monster Hunter World. This also had its own quirks with how you could progress the levels of the system, which was more similar to Apex monsters in 4 Ultimate. Overall, this system was quite divisive, as were Rise and Sunbreak as the game and expansion as a whole. They were very different from World and Iceborne, even though you can clearly trace back almost every mechanic as being inspired or just directly reused from a prior Monster Hunter game, and I find that quite interesting. Personally, I was a big fan of Rise and Sunbreak, and I think
the problem is just anything new, anything different, people hate on it. Always has been the case, always will be the case.
part of that is just an appreciation for how wildly different every iteration of Monster Hunter can be, while still undeniably feeling like it is Monster Hunter. The expansion, of course, also followed the trend of title updates post-launch, and while it definitely tried to hit that same mark of challenge with its final title updates as the Iceborne expansion did for Monster Hunter World, it hit it in a very different way. The final official title update was the return of Amatsu, a big, powerful beastie from the 3rd generation originally, whose fight was made to be cinematic as hell in Sunbreak, and really just sort of accentuate the wire bug's traversal and the variety that it can offer as an option. I absolutely adored that fight, but the final monster that was actually added to the game was Primordial 𝘕𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑧𝑚, who fit like the perfect cap to the story of the entire game. This was a version of 𝘕𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑧𝑚 struggling to fight off the 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝑵, but occasionally giving in, resulting in an absolutely wild encounter that I still think is one of the more challenging fights of the main series as a whole, and the cutscene that follows it just perfectly ends Sunbreak in general. This brings us to now, today, where the current Monster Hunter game is Monster Hunter Wilds, released in February
the one I
of
played.
2025.
Woo!
It's being enjoyed by tons of people around the world. It had a simultaneous release on PC and consoles, and it has so far followed the title update pattern started by the 5th generation games too. I won't go through all of Wilds, of course, as it's the extremely new game. We all know what's going on with it, but as we reach this part of the timeline of the series, I just want to sort of take a moment here to think backwards. Think about Wilds and everything involved in it that makes it unique and makes it special, and then think about all of the connections between those to mechanics that were in some way tested or tried or introduced previously in a different Monster Hunter game and iterated on again and again to reach what we have today. Wilds is a marvelous game full of unique gameplay and experiences, but almost every one of them can be traced back in some way to an origin in a previous Monster Hunter game. And that's a big part of why I wanted to make this video now, was to say, especially for those who have only found the series with its most recent entries, exactly how much this series has evolved over time and how much you can follow these threads, because I find it just really, really cool to follow this and the patterns that got us to where we are now. That just about does it for today, everyone. Something a bit different and a bit
That was a
longer
good
than
video,
what we
explained
normally
everything
do here on the
well.
channel, but it was something that I wanted to do, sort of in celebration of Monster Hunter Wilds, and of course in celebration of Monster Hunter as a whole. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and if there's any other context you think is worth knowing about with all this, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Yeah.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage.
That was a good video. I know I didn't say a lot because I was just taking information. But yeah, I know more about Monster Hunter now.